Hi, my name is Rhynell Mouton. Pat Garcia is an artist here in Arcata who does photography and paintings. Join us as we explore the artist's journey.
Living out here and experiencing, the nature in the way that we have the opportunity to is kind of fostered something like a respect in me for the land that we live on, and I think it's also doing the same thing for everybody else. Kind of really just giving us, the opportunity to kind of gain this respect, and I find that that's kind of a subject in a lot of the work that I make. Kind of like how we interact with our environment and how kind of there's this give and take.
Pat, thanks for having us. What inspired you to be a photographer?
When I was going to community college, I happened to stumble across a darkroom class, and I had already had a pretty big interest in photography just because as a young kid I was skateboarding a lot, and we would record ourselves skateboarding with these little DV cameras, and from there it was just taking pictures back and forth of our friends and things like that, and I happened to kind of gain an interest there. And when I went to community college, I got into the darkroom, and it really just opened up a lot of doors. I had a really good mentor at that time who was pushing me a lot and, really set me on a solid track. And I mean, here I am, I'm still trying to, push that craft and kind of explore with it, I guess. It's an interesting medium.
And I've seen that you shoot a lot of black and white. Would you rather black and white film or color film?
It's different. And I mean, shooting black and white and shooting color film, or color in general, is just, it's a completely different approach. When I'm shooting black and white, it has a lot to do with light and tonality and things like that, whereas color is it's just adding a whole nother dimension to it, where if I'm shooting black and white, the sky isn't blue, it's like a tone, but when I'm shooting color, I gotta take into consideration, there's gonna be a giant blob of blue up there and a bunch of green down here. Yeah. It's a different way of working in a way, and I feel like one side of it informs the other. It's I don't know. It's kind of like a nice kind of back and forth, I guess. Yeah. Phoebe, come here. Hey, this is Phoebe. I've had her since she was a puppy. She's about 8 now. She's kind of getting up there, but she's a big part of my life, that's for sure. I take her out with me when I go on photo walks or whatever, and she's pretty funny. She's so patient, I set up my camera and be like, wait right here, and she'll just be like, ooh, and sit down. And
what is one person who inspires you?
Mm-hmm. It's funny, but my instructor, Dave Woody over at Humboldt State, has really been a huge inspiration for me. I mean, he's done a lot for me, and he gave me the camera that I'm shooting with now, and he does a lot to help me out. And yeah. I mean, he's a wonderful photographer. Yeah. I mean, probably one of the best portrait photographers I've ever seen, I mean, his images are great. We are really similar in a way. I look at him and, he's 20 years older than me or whatever, but it's weird because I see a lot of the habits that he has, or the way that he approaches things, and I'm like, gosh, it's kind of sort of similar to the way that I kind of approach things. I mean, he definitely is a big inspiration.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, he's out here still teaching, and he's hopefully pushing other kids to do the same thing.
No, definitely. I feel like teachers aren't appreciated enough. So shout out to all the teachers.
No,
we do appreciate you guys.
I mean, that's my experience at HSU. I want to say it was here is when I really started to kind of develop, I guess, my approach and kind of my style of image making, I suppose. But yeah, it was probably those years, I would say, that things started really kind of falling in line, and I guess the path started to kind of be clear, I mean, there isn't really any clear path with the arts in general, it's not like I can just be like, I'm gonna be a photographer and I'm gonna make, a living doing this.
So in photography, what gives you the most satisfaction when you are shooting these shots?
When I have a preconceived notion of what I want an image to look like, and I go out and try to make it, 9 times out of 10 doesn't happen. You know what I mean? It's like doesn't quite line up with whatever expectations I may have had. You know, I look at the negatives after the fact and I'm like, oh wow, like, you know, there's that image that I didn't even think about. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that's the keeper, you know, or
the ones that's unplanned.
yeah,
are the best
exactly,
ones.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it happens that way most of the time. Sometimes, you know, I'll kind of achieve some results that I was looking for in a sense, but a lot of the times it's just kind of luck of the draw, it seems like, you know.
What is something that dissatisfies you with photography, and do you care to elaborate on that?
The way that Instagram works, you know, or kind of social media in general, it's really, really easy to kind of look at a lot of work from all over the place and from artists from all over the world. And I think when I look at it, it's hard to not compare it to my own work, you know, and that I find dissatisfaction in that, and comparing my own images and work to that of others, and it really makes me want to do something different in a way. And I mean, I don't mean to throw shade at anyone out there doing what they're doing, you know, but I see a lot of the same thing, you know, a lot of people approaching, you know, photography as a medium in kind of the same way. It really makes me think about my work and like how I'm kind of like taking that same approach. And that I find slightly dissatisfying. You know, it makes me like kind of take a step back, you know, and I am asking myself like, how can I, you know, make this more like, I guess, about myself? Because, you know, if there's anything that is, I guess, unique about my work, it is that it's made by me, so.
Exactly. Yeah, there are a lot of filters out there that may look like, you know, darkroom photography, but it might not even be actual darkroom photography. It could be a filter, which is taken away from somebody like you, who's actually in the darkroom, you know, creating those photos. Yeah.
How I present my work too, you know, like, again, bringing it back to kind of these social media platforms, and I call it the void, kind of. Whenever I have like images that I am unsure of what to do with, you know, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna throw them onto the internet or whatever, you know. And it isn't doing anything necessarily, you know, and it's making me consider how exactly I want to share my work.
So I read that years ago you had said you're skating, you were pretty reckless, a little reckless, not you know.
Yeah, you know, as a kid. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and not best of places, but you know, that's neither here nor there at this point.
Exactly. But when did you realize that you wanted to take the photography serious? Like when you went from just, you know, skating and playing around to actually, you know, I want to kind of make this a career.
Right. Well, you know, that had to have been, I mentioned before, my experience at community college was pretty formative, especially in kind of how I decided to, you know, take this path. It's up to me to like make, you know, the connections and the work that, you know, I need to make in order to be an artist. Yeah.
Do you think it's good to step outside of your boundaries when it comes to photography?
Yeah, absolutely. I am constantly trying to push the envelope of like what I'm doing and what I could be doing, I guess. Just really trying to shake things up in a way that'll like kind of bring something new and exciting to me, you know, in my work.
Do you have a favorite place to take photos or a favorite subject?
In terms of subject, you know, nature is kind of what I'm into. And then portraits as well. I find that I really enjoy taking portraits. I've spent a lot of time out in the community forest making images, which has been challenging and fun because my camera's huge. But you know, I'm walking around the forest with the tripod on my back and this huge camera, and I encounter people out there, and you know, everyone is always real curious, which is kind of fun. And I mean, I usually go out there with my dog, and you know, I'll walk through the forest. I do kind of like this view. It's kind of a meditative process, I think. I mean, usually it's, you know, it's nice and quiet, which is a good thing, and it feels good to get outside and kind of like really have an intense sort of attention to my surroundings. And just, it's not like I'm looking for something in particular. You know, I don't come out here and like, I'm going to take a picture of a tree today, or I don't know, it's kind of, I guess, whatever calls to me. But yeah, like I said, it's pretty meditative, I think, kind of just being out here and surrounding yourself with what we got. It's beautiful out here. I mean, there's definitely some, romanticism happening when I make the images. You know what I mean? It's looking at this at the landscape and kind of putting it in a way that makes you feel appreciation for it, and I don't know, admiration and respect, I think, is a big one too. Yeah, when I'm shooting with film, I'm creating something tangible. I'm creating a physical object that holds this bit of information, that it's just like a still scene, like a shot from life, I guess. But it's nice to be able to like hold something and to store it, and at one point in the future I can pull it out of a box and look back at it, and I don't know, it's nice to have that security, I guess, that it's not just going to disappear one day if my electronics suddenly decide to break on me or something like that. I'm hopefully going to have these for the rest of my life. I mean, I've seen this space like so many times, but there's just so many different ways to kind of capture it, and different lighting situations and things like that. There's just so much interest in there, and I mean, we live in such a unique, environment. I mean, we got the beach 5 minutes that way and the forest 5 minutes that way. It's kind of hard to beat. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much to see out here. I feel like living in this area has really kind of fostered like this interest that has been growing subtly, in myself for as long as I can imagine, but it just really kind of gave me this sort of, opportunity to kind of really dive into it.
Well, Pat, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having us in your home, and thank you for joining us on Studio Space.